how much mechanical fuel pump power do you really need? You're gonna find out this time on Engine Masters. This is going to be a curious episode of Engine Masters because for once it's not about making horsepower, it's about supporting horsepower, specifically with the fuel system. See, the thing is, I think there's a ton of guys out there who are dealing with older muscle car V8s and they've got between 400 and 600 horsepower, and they don't really want to deal with an electric fuel pump. They don't want the wiring, they don't want the plumbing, they don't want the return line, they don't want the rocket science, they fear it for whatever reason, and they want to run mechanical. I've been that guy. I've also been the guy with a lot of struggles actually trying to make 400 or 500 horsepower go all the way down the drag strip without running out of fuel. And we're gonna show you exactly that as we test 4 different mechanical fuel pumps on our little small block Chevy. It's a 372 cubic inch Dart-based engine. And have a look at this graphic from a prior episode when we were running it with a killer Era Motive electric fuel pump. And you can see that this thing uses AFR heads and a big hydraulic roller cam to make about 480 pound-feet of torque and 510 plus horsepower, and it runs all the way out to 7,000 RPM. We're not only going to run the thing on the dyno, but we're gonna slow it down to make it suffer even more as far as fuel consumption goes. Normally, we will pull these things at 300 RPM per second. We're gonna run this at 200 RPM per second, so it's a good long dyno pull that is gonna consume as much fuel out of the bowls of the carburetor as possible to test these 4 pumps. Now, I got all of these at Summit Racing. Here was my logic. This one right here flows 20 gallons per hour. That is little itty bitty tiny not good enough. So that's gonna be number 1. Number 2, we are going to test the cheapest mechanical fuel pump for a small block Chevy that I found at Summit. This thing is $15.99 and rated at 40 gallons per hour. Now that's typically what I would run around if I was dealing with like a 300 or 400 horsepower engine. And then there's the pump that I dealt with in the 80s all the time, the Made in USA Classic Carter Super Pump. This thing is rated at 120 gallons per hour. And I think this is probably our winner, but we're gonna find out. But I stepped up beyond that to the super hardcore Holley mechanical pump that will flow 170 gallons per hour. So in each case, we're gonna be looking at whether these will support the power or whether they will run out of fuel. But there's a couple of other details that we're really gonna be looking at that don't involve horsepower at all. We wanna look at the flow rate of each of these pumps as well as the pressure that they can maintain. So let's walk in the dyno cell right now and we'll show you exactly how we're gonna do that and how I set up the fuel system for this test. Now we've got this whole shebang hung on the dyno, and I really got to thank Troy Goldie here at Westech. You don't often see him on camera, but he does a lot of this physical labor. So we got this thing all sorted out now with how we're going to test it. We're not really looking at horsepower this time. We want to look at fuel flow and pressure, and here's how we're going to do it. This little doohickey right here is a fuel turbine. So the gasoline comes in and the gasoline flows out of it. And it's got a little wheel in there that counts like units of measure going past it and converts that into pounds per hour of fuel flow. And so that's how we're gonna be tracking the fuel flow. Now the fuel system has a gas tank on the other side of the wall and this AN line that comes up here to the fuel turbine. And for the purposes of this test, I've got 5/16 rubber line coming all the way around over here. And I made sure to run a whole bunch of it. I got 25 feet of this stuff, so it's just like it was in a car, or worse than if it was in a car. And we come around here and you can see that I've got it now connected to a mechanical fuel pump, which we've never run on the dyno. This is kind of unusual. So up here at the engine, you can see the second sensor that we're going to be using in this test, which is fuel pressure right here at the float bowl. So you're gonna be able to see pressure at idle when the float is up and the bowl is full and the needle and seat is closed. And then you're gonna watch what happens as that float bowl runs out of fuel, the float drops, and the pump starts to flow fuel through the engine. You'll see how the pressure drops right there. So that's our 2 sensors, the turbine up there and the pressure sensor here. Now let's look at the specific fuel system we're gonna start with. This fuel pump is the lamest mechanical pump I could find for a small block Chevy at Summit Racing. You can actually sort by gallons per hour or select by gallons per hour. And I found one that was 20. It's an application for like a 50s 283 Chevy or something like that. It's terrible. And to make it worse, it's got 1/8-inch ports in it. 1/8-inch pipe thread is the inlet and outlet port on this pump. And the fittings that we got in it are actually for 1/4-inch rubber line. And so it's the worst case scenario. We've got it coming out of the pump into a Fram G2 regular old fuel filter through this little whoop-de-doo, and then we split it off and we've got one going to the primary bowl, one going to the secondary bowl. So this is a very typical system that you would see in your average car, except for the fact that we've got that spectacularly weak fuel pump on it. We're gonna fire it up right now and find out how 20 gallons per hour of flow can hang with an engine that makes north of 500 horsepower. How come you guys don't seem excited about this?
We don't have enough fuel pump.
Well, that's the thing. It's a test we've never, ever done before. We're going to learn stuff. I think it's cool.
I didn't know they made a pump that cheesy and small.
20 gallons per hour?
We're putting the fittings in it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's smaller than like a pencil.
It's an 8-pipe fitting.
It's scary is what it is. And what really scares me is this is a pretty good motor. So I'm not liking this much at all.
I know, because it's going to go lean at the top end. You're going to have to be on it when the float bowl starts to run dry. You're going to have to be lightning brûlée on the shutoff.
It'd be funny, though, if it was enough.
So what was the application for this
fuel pump? I don't even know. I just went to Summit and found the lamest gallon per hour that they offered, and this is what it was.
It was like for a 265 Chevy or something like that?
It's like for a 283 or something, and what's funny is that it was actually $60 pump. It's like the next pump we're gonna test was 15 bucks. This one was more expensive to be worse, but I wanted to see how bad it could get. So here's my worry when we thought of this whole test is that we're gonna put the lamest fuel system and it's just gonna be no problem whatsoever.
I don't see how 20 gallons can keep up. There's going to be a problem.
So instead of power this time, we're gonna be looking at, let's see, your vane actually, it doesn't measure gallons per hour, it's gonna be pounds per hour, so we'll have to convert it.
Yeah.
And then we're also measuring fuel pressure right up there at the bowl, so.
This is really, you know, when a motor goes lean, this is like a worst case scenario, potentially. If something were to run out of gas, that's okay, because then there's nothing to burn.
Right.
When something goes lean, and it's lean enough that it loses power, but it still runs.
Well, but I think we've all had the experience of being in a car that doesn't have a quality fuel system, and you're on it, and it just sort of goes, "Whoa." It doesn't shut off.
No, that's bad.
It's just running off a vapor of fuel in the bowl.
It's running off fear is what it's running off.
Yeah. So fire it up, and let's find out if the 20 gallon per hour mechanical fuel pump can serve 500 horsepower.
Are you sure you want to do this to me?
It's not my motor.
Oh, it will be as soon as we're done if you heard it.
You bought it, Freiberger. You broke it, you bought it. No. I'm surprised you stayed in it that long.
I know. I was leaving it hang in there at like 14.0 when I saw 14.3.
That could not hang at all.
I glanced over there and it had 0.7 psi.
Right.
Then I heard one misfire and I said, I am done.
What happened there is we saw that the fuel pressure just dropped to 0.7 psi and the air-fuel ratio went to 14:1, meaning it's just running off of vapor in the fuel bowl. Like the pump can barely get enough gas in there to keep it running. All right, so the first curve that we got pulled up here is fuel pressure, and it looks okay until you realize that this scale is 0.7 to 0.9 psi.
That's not enough.
Less than 1. Look at that. And the thing is, it's a little deceptive because even at 0, there's still flow.
Yeah, with zero pressure, there's still some flow.
So while this is indicative of a big problem, the bigger problem is going to be when we look at the fuel flow in pounds per hour.
Yeah.
Let's check that out. This scale goes from 50 down here up to 140. And the most that we saw is 135, but I think the thing you predicted, both of you guys did, was that it just flatlines at a certain point, and it's at a very low RPM. At 250 RPM, the fuel pump is just not keeping up.
That's all there is.
Basically, it won't flow any more fuel with more RPM. It's just done. Yeah, my determination is that pump is inadequate.
Well, yeah, and it's also a pump nobody ever
Genius.
is going to use. I mean, This was just for the point of making a sample for the audience to see how bad it's
One
bad.
thing for sure, nobody's going to pay $65 for it.
No, they're not. So the next thing, I don't think we should bother trying to upgrade this fuel system at all. Let's go straight to my $15 pump.
And
Ready?
this is basically just a replacement pump.
So that first pump was the lamest one that I could find at Summit. This is the cheapest one at summitracing.com. It's $15.99. It's a Carter pump. It's rated at 40 gallons per hour, and they claim that it'll make 7.5 to 9 PSI. So
You just shot me with gasoline, Steve-O.
It's kind of what mechanical fuel pumps do.
feel the burn.
What was the aim proper?
Super cheapo pump, ready to go. We'll find out if it can hang right now. Looked like it dipped immediately, and at one point it came up and then dropped again, almost as if it had filled the bowl and then the bowl dropped again.
Yeah,
But-
I saw a little bit of that wiggling. I'm not quite sure why. But
Let's look at the
take a
fuel
at
pressure curve. Okay, yeah, that's wide open, and then it comes up with RPM and then drops. So do you think this is where the flow bowl opened? The needle and seat?
I'll bet the float has already dropped there. You know, it's probably moving some in the bowl, but it's basically going to be pretty low the whole time.
Let's have a look at the flow and see if it flattens out like that other one seemed to.
You know, the thing is, honestly, here is what's happening here is not necessarily what's going to happen in a car. Think about G-forces.
They actually say when you're doing a killer drag race car that the weight of the column of fuel in the hose between the tank and the carb, when it launches, it's pushing back the other way.
It is.
Because
That's why
there's a difference.
Pro Stock cars launched so hard that they finally allowed them to move the tank from the rear of the car to the front of the car.
So
Because they were having so many fuel issues. So now
Yeah.
it's helping it, back when they were carbureted, helping it get to the carburetor than holding it back away from it. This looks a whole lot better than 130.
Yep. Now we're looking at the curve of fuel flow through that little vein or turbine that I showed you. And you can see it's sort of sketchy down here, and it starts to level out right around 5,000 all the way to 7,000 RPM. It's fairly consistent, and it peaks at 231, which is actually how many gallons per hour?
38.
38.
Wow.
And that's rated at 40.
That's
So
what the engine needs.
yeah, basically what I'm deriving from this is that this pump is just adequate.
Just barely.
It's just right at adequate. So 40 gallons per hour for a 500 horsepower engine. It seems to be able to keep up, at least for the duration of this dyno pull. Now, if we were climbing the Grapevine at wide open throttle or
Pikes
on a
Peak.
drag strip or Pikes Peak, it might be a different story.
Bonneville.
On the dyno, this thing is actually hanging. Ready to move up to the next one?
A real pump.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go.
Well, that's it. The 120 gallon per hour pump is installed, and this should be a lot better than what we had before.
I like standing here and watching you work, though.
You know what? It's not work. It's almost like play. It's like being on a paid vacation when I come here.
Look at that, just more consistently on the decline. The scale here is only 1 PSI though, so we're talking 5.5 PSI to 4.25 PSI. I'm kind of surprised by that, but let's have a look at the volume. Okay, interesting.
That's really nice and smooth.
Yeah, but look, it came up to
bump.
228 pounds per hour and leveled off, although it's taking a little bit of an upturn there. What, didn't the other one level at the same point?
Let's take a peek.
The $15 one? Let's overlay. Oh, interesting. So red is our $15 40 gallon per hour pump, and black is our $90 120 gallon per hour pump.
This is starting to bring some things to light. Wasn't the pressure up and down kind of wildly in there too? So I wonder if it's a matter of flow affecting pressure or pressure affecting flow.
Pressure affecting flow, I would imagine.
Yeah, the more expensive pump, more stable.
But both pumps at 7,000 RPM were very similar in output, pressure-wise.
Because that's what the engine wants.
That's what I was going to get to.
Has nothing to do with pump.
We've leveled out here because that's what the engine's going to consume, not what the pump is capable of putting out.
We can put a 900 gallon.
I agree as far as pounds per hour, but PSI is going to depend on whether the pump capacity can keep up with the engine demand.
It served the needs of the engine at the same rate as the $15 pump, but your concern about the fuel pressure is what I'm trying to wrap my head around. And here's something we haven't yet considered.
Let me guess.
Maybe this 120 gallon per hour pump can't deliver that pressure because we're making it suck through that 5/16 hose.
Yeah, at some point in
Using
time, the
small
hose
fuel
is the restriction.
So should we run this pump again, but run 3/8 hose the whole way instead of the 5/16?
Absolutely.
Sure.
So we agree.
Yeah.
Let's do it. So there you go. We made a change, removed this 5/16 inch fuel line and installed 3/8. You can see that it's bigger. So we're gonna go test now and find out if it makes a difference in that pump's ability to make flow and pressure. It made a difference.
Made a little difference.
Yeah, it did.
I think it made quite a bit of difference.
I can't wait to see. Let's pull up the graph. There you go. That is the difference between 5/16 fuel hose in red and 3/8 inch line in black. Dulcich and I were all the time saying, man, people overkill fuel systems. You don't need all that stuff. But the 3/8 line thing, I believe in it more now.
Oh, yeah.
You
I
really
mean,
do need the 3/8
Seeing
line.
is believing.
Yeah.
Look at that.
That's the coolest thing I've learned so far to date. 3/8 hose wins. Now we're on to the next pump. Next up, this is going to be the Holley 170 gallon per hour pump. The other thing different about this one is that it has got AN fittings, Army Navy, like braided line fittings in -8, which is like a 1/2 inch line on there. And so we're actually going to feed it from the pump all the way in to here. It'll be 1/2 inch line up till we split off to the -6 that goes in the carburetor. This is a fuel pump at 170 gallons per hour that I would never actually purchase for this engine.
You wouldn't? Why?
It would be, if I was a normal guy with this engine, I'd be going, this is overkill, I don't really need that. I would have bought that last one.
I think I would probably consider this purchase.
Really?
Yeah.
We haven't even seen what it does yet, but I would buy this pump or something similar like the Striegel pump or something, something double diaphragm. I think Edelbrock also makes one that's 170 gallon or so.
Well, let's fire it up and find out what happens. I mean, we know that it's already good enough. Maybe this will be better.
Whoa, that's pretty good.
Yeah, basically started at 6.7, spiked up to 6.8, and worst case scenario it was 6.2.
And finished at 6.4.
Let's compare it to the other pumps though.
That's where I think we're going to really see
Yeah.
the difference is when we compare it to something else.
Compare it to the Carter Super Pump with the 3/8 line. Oh yeah, but you can see the difference of whereas this is right around 6.8 and this is right around 5 1/4. Let's
They
pull
still
them all
look pretty
up.
flat.
they're both-
Let's-
Pretty decent curves, I think.
I think it's going to show that this one has a little less change.
Yeah, this is that 120 pump with the smaller line, which is
5/16
dated.
line. This is the 40 gallon, $15 pump.
Yep.
Yeah.
All over the place, yeah. So really what you're buying with a fuel pump at this point is like consistency of fuel pressure and I guess just
Capacity.
faith, capacity, trust.
Yeah.
Well, let's look at flow. It's probably still flowing the same because at this point the engine is just using what it's using. So there's your volume.
I think we had an air bubble there.
An air bubble or something like that. Those little turbines are actually super sensitive. All it takes is a little air bubble to give them a blip like that. So sometimes there's an anomaly. But let's look at it compared with that 120 gallon, the final D test. So this is the 120 gallon pump with the 3/8 line. It's roughly the same because now we're at the point of it's what the engine is going to use.
The engine's pulling what it needs to through the carburetor. My opinion is this is the right pump out of what we have done with these fuel lines for this engine. I think really if you've got a 300 horsepower engine, it doesn't need this pump. If you've got a 700 horsepower engine, you're going to need this pump or something even bigger. So I think it's a matter of demands, but this thing is so much more stable.
That really was interesting. It's a test I've never done before. I've never even thought of it before.
I liked it.
I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go wrap it up.
Okay.
Dulcich, man.
What?
I feel like I've taken a blow to my persona.
Really? A punch in the gut?
Yeah, I really wanted to be able to walk out of here like the crotchety, naysaying dinosaur and go, you don't need a trick fuel system. I can run 500 horsepower on any fuel pump. I really wanted to be that guy. It was kind of why I set up the test.
Oh, I know, but you found out you were wrong.
I was completely wrong. I can't do it.
Why?
I actually knew I was going to be wrong, but I was hoping that I was closer to right. How's your persona holding up?
I'm pretty good.
Really?
Yeah. But
I thought for sure you would be on my side. You'd want to see this turd actually just cranking out the power.
Well, I really wanted to see this Auto Parts Special replacement style pump perform better.
That would be the key. The $15 one would be good. But let's conclude what we think of this one, knowing what we know now. I would run this on 400 horsepower all day and not worry about it.
If you're on a super tight budget and you're not making super high horsepower, that guy is not too bad.
It really isn't bad, but I think when you crest up north of 450 horsepower is when you gotta really start paying attention. And I gotta be honest, as much as my go-to Carter Super Pump that I used on everything, in the 80s with nitrous or whatever, as good as it did on this,
it's good.
I now actually believe that there is merit in overkilling your fuel system and getting that 170 gallon per hour unit on your 500 horse motor.
Final takeaway.
Gonna have to buy the really good fuel pump from now on.
And put a good sized hose on it too.
Actually, you know what my final takeaway is an idea for a future episode of Engine Masters, which is, can we make 1,000 horsepower through a mechanical fuel pump? That would be cool.
Oh, I'd like to try it.
And I'm actually kind of working on that. I've got an engine coming together. So if you want to follow along and see that as it develops before it's a future episode, well then stay tuned to us on social media. Of course, you can follow the show. We're Engine Masters on Instagram, Hot Rod Engine Masters on Facebook. He is Steve Dulcich on Instagram. The man, the myth, the legend. I would be David Freiberger. Steve is going to be Dino Brule. Follow us all because there's good stuff all month long in between the required watching of episodes of Engine Masters on Motor Trend.
Ah! You gave me an eye full of petrol. How dare you? The nerve of that man.
I shot you in the pants before.
How many ways can you...
I really didn't. I would never have done that on purpose. Maybe in your pants, but
How
not
many
in
ways
your
can you
eyes.
spray good old Dulcich with petrol?